Do you know the real story behind how the American Revolution began? No, I'm not talking about the stuff you memorized in your high school textbooks. I'm talking about the messy, shocking, dramatic chain of events that most people never hear about. The story of regular people, angry merchants, broke farmers, spies, smugglers, tavern fights, and even a secret network that lit the spark long before 1776. Because the truth is, the American Revolution didn't just suddenly start with the Declaration of Independence. Oh no. It began years earlier, in ways that will make you question everything you thought you knew about America's birth. It all started with money. That's right, follow the money and you'll find the revolution. By the 1760s, Britain was flat out broke from fighting wars in Europe, especially the 7 Years' War. So, what did the British government do? They turned to their colonies in America. The 13 colonies stretched across the East Coast and basically said, "Hey, you guys are part of our empire. You should pay up." The problem, Americans didn't exactly agree. They believed they had their own assemblies, their own rights, their own say in how they were taxed. That's where the storm began to brew. The first real spark, the Sugar Act of 1764, doesn't sound dramatic, right? Wrong. This was Britain taxing sugar, molasses, wine, stuff that Americans loved and needed. And while it hit the wealthy merchants hardest, it also touched every ordinary person who bought sweet goods or rum. Americans were furious. And what did they say? That classic line, "No taxation without representation." But here's the twist. Did you know that line wasn't just about freedom and liberty? It was also about smugglers protecting their business. Yup, guys who made their money sneaking goods into Boston and New York without paying Britain a penny were suddenly the loudest voices for liberty. Sounds less noble now, doesn't it? But it didn't stop there. Britain doubled down with the Stamp Act of 1765. This wasn't just a tax on sugar or wine. This was a tax on paper. Every newspaper, every legal document, even playing cards, you had to buy an official stamp from Britain. Imagine living your life and suddenly having to pay extra just to get married, to write a will, or to print a newspaper. Americans lost it. Protests exploded in every colony. Newspapers blasted the British as tyrants. Effigies of tax collectors were hanged and burned in the streets. And one group rose up in the chaos, the Sons of Liberty. Now, if you've heard that name before, you probably think of brave patriots fighting for freedom. But let me paint you a different picture. The Sons of Liberty were rowdy, dangerous, and sometimes straight-up violent. These were men like Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, and other firebrands. They used mob action to scare British officials into resigning. Stamp distributors were tarred and feathered, literally covered in burning hot tar and feathers, paraded through the streets in humiliation. Imagine the smell. Imagine the pain. That wasn't some noble speech, it was raw street justice. But here's where things really get interesting. The revolution didn't only grow from protests in big cities. It spread in taverns. That's right, taverns were like the TikTok of the 1700s. People gathered there, drank rum, shared gossip, spread news, and riled each other up. Information traveled fast. Someone in Boston could deliver a fiery rant in a tavern one night, and within days, the same story, the same anger was alive in New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. The colonies weren't just drinking together, they were uniting. And then came the Boston Massacre. March 5, 1770. Picture this, a freezing night in Boston. Angry colonists crowd around British soldiers, throwing snowballs, ice, rocks, insults. Tension builds. Shots ring out. When the smoke clears, 5 colonists lay dead. One of them, Crispus Attucks, a man of African and native descent, would become one of the first martyrs of the Revolution. Paul Revere rushes to engrave the famous propaganda image. British soldiers lined up, firing mercilessly into an innocent crowd. Was it accurate? Not really. Was it effective? Oh yes, the massacre became a rallying cry. But here's the untold truth. The massacre didn't immediately start the revolution. For a while, things calmed down. Britain pulled back some taxes. Colonists went back to trade, farming, business. For a moment, it looked like everything might just smooth over. But then Britain made a fatal mistake. They gave a monopoly to the East India Company. Translation: only British tea sold by British-approved merchants at British-controlled prices. To Americans, this wasn't just about tea, it was about control. And then the night that changed everything. The Boston Tea Party, December 16, 1773. You've seen the schoolbook version. Men dressed as Native Americans dumping tea into Boston Harbor. But here's what you probably didn't know. It was organized chaos. They dumped over 92,000 pounds of tea. That's worth millions today. And they cleaned up after themselves. That's right, they swept the ships, replaced broken locks, and made sure the protest looked disciplined, not like a drunken riot. They wanted to send a message. This wasn't just anger, it was defiance. Britain's response: brutal. They passed the coercive acts, what Americans called the intolerable acts. They shut down Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for. Imagine your entire city being punished because of one protest. Food shortages, job losses, ships stuck at sea. But here's where Britain made their biggest mistake. They thought punishing Boston would scare the other colonies into obedience. Instead, it did the opposite. Colonies that barely talked to each other before now stood shoulder to shoulder. Boston's fight became everyone's fight. And so, the First Continental Congress was born in 1774. Leaders from across the colonies, men like George Washington, John Adams, Patrick Henry, met in Philadelphia. They weren't calling for independence yet. Not at first. They wanted Britain to back off, to respect their rights as Englishmen. But as they met, as they shared stories of British soldiers quartered in homes, of merchants ruined by taxes, of violence in the streets, they began to realize something bigger was brewing. Something irreversible. The final spark. Lexington and Concord, April 1775. The British marched out of Boston to seize colonial weapons, but word got out thanks to a secret network of riders, including the famous Paul Revere. Colonists armed themselves. Shots rang out. Nobody knows who fired first, but suddenly the world had changed. The shot heard round the world, as Emerson later called it. Farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, they faced down the most powerful army on earth. And they didn't back down. That's when the revolution truly began. Not in 1776 with the Declaration, not with fancy speeches, but with years of anger, money, mob action, propaganda, secret networks, and ordinary people pushed too far. It began with sugar and stamps, with taverns and tea, with massacres and midnight rides. It began with people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. So, next time someone tells you America was born in 1776, remember this. The revolution began long before the ink dried on that parchment. It began in the streets, in the taverns, in the whispers of ordinary men and women who dared to believe they could change the world. And you know what? They did.